First, let me thank you for coming back and for giving me the opportunity to talk about African issues. Um, as we speak today, just to put in context, there's been a problem. I think the Ukraine is now at war with Russia as of since yesterday, and that's a tragic thing right now. But it gives context about what the times are that we're in. Um, the question of China, if you look at it just without a view of history, it's it would look like China is being extremely aggressive. Um, but I want to put some context to it. You know, Chinese people and Africans have had long relationships that date back thousands of years. Um, so let me just start by saying that there's a possibility. In fact, there seems to be some proof that Chinese civilization, um, as as every other Asian civilization, is an offshoot of African civilization. That the Shang dynasty, for instance, or the Zhou dynasty, the early dynasties before China was unified under the Qing, uh, the unification of China having taken place around 200 BC, before Christ. Before then, the Shang dynasty seems to have had African elements to it. We think that it was an African dynasty at one, or predominantly African, or had African elements in it. Um, Africans and Chinese have traded and interacted for thousands of years before the Shang and during all the other dynasties. Um, this particular place where we are at one time was part of a dynasty of an empire called the Shenzhen Empire, which the Portuguese refer to as the Zheng Empire, and the Chinese refer to as the Zhengdan. And this empire was lasted from around, I'd say, 600, around 600 AD to about 1000 AD, around 1090, the 1090s and early 1100s. It collapsed. But at the height of its golden age, let's say, it was ranked, I think, as the fourth most powerful empire in the world. Of course, you won't find this in many of the modern books. You have to go back to books which are a bit older. Um, the Shenzi were contemporaries with would have been the Tang, no, the Song dynasty. The Song dynasty, yeah, the Song dynasty. Uh, the Song dynasty in China had its capital at Kaifeng. I think it's in some place called Henan, maybe. I think that is, I didn't. I didn't do some revision before this question came up, but the Shenzi emperor at the time would have been sent an embassy to China, ambassadors, and they delivered a giraffe to Kaifeng. So as a gift, but they gave these gifts to a lot of other emperors. They sent a gift, I think, to Morocco, a giraffe also. They also sent a giraffe, I think, to Oman and other places. So China and Africa had relations like this in those times. And this story is available in a record by the following dynasty, and the record is called the Sung Shi. He talks about the embassies. He talks about how the people here sent giraffes in 1071, and then again in I think 1083, around there. We think that the collapse of that empire, the Shenzi, is what led to the birth of our kingdom here, the Busongora kingdom, because the founder of this kingdom was one of the empresses of the Shenzi. Um, prior to that, the Shenzi had, had dominated both coasts, the East African coast and the West African coast, and they had also fought the Nubians. The Nubian Empire had about 3 states, a federation of 3 states: Makuria, Arua, and Alodia in Sudan, in what is now central and southern Sudan. And they had also signed a pact with the Arabs in 652 AD, which then began the slave trade. I think this ties in with the other question about slavery. This is where you ask that question. So they are connected somewhat. But the Nubians began supplying slaves to the Arabs after the Battle of Dongola. The Battle of Dongola took place around 652 AD. It was very brutal. It was one of the most vicious battles of the Middle Ages. Interestingly, both sides had chainmail and horses, and the Nubian archers were superior to the Arabs, the Arab fighters, and so basically they reached a stalemate. The Arabs could not take Dongola, could not defeat the Nubians, but the Nubians weren't able to push them out entirely. So they made a compromise. Since Egypt was a big producer of cereal, the pact required the Nubians to be supplied by the Egyptian Arabs who had taken over Egypt to supply grain, and also the Africans, the Nubians, to supply, I think it was initially 40 slaves, I don't remember, per year or something like that. So what they did is they began raiding the Shenzhen Empire in the south to supply slaves to the caliphate. And then the caliphs would then, initially they didn't do castration, but at some point when the system broke down, they began castrating the male slaves in Dongola, and then transporting them to Constantinople and then to other parts of Asia. But this is the empire, the Shenzi, who were fighting the Nubians and then fighting initially at some point towards the end of their life against the Portuguese. So it lasted a long time. But if you want to know about the Shenzi, there was a Shenzi rebellion in 800 in Iraq and Iran. It's very famous. It's called the Zenji Rebellion or Janji Rebellion. The Shenzi, today the word Shenzi is an insult here in parts of Central Africa. But everything indigenous here is called Shenzi. It is the place where Janjira in Oman is named, or in northern Arabia is named after the Shenzi. Zanzibar is named after Shenzi. Zanzi is just a variant of Shenzi. Things like that. So there's those places where they have these names. But you can trace the history of this empire. And a lot has been written about it. But anyway, they trade with China as equals. When China went through problems later on, when the Chinese empire was destroyed by the British and the European powers in 1911, when the last emperor was, the empire was removed, Puyi was removed as the emperor of China, and they end up in a place called Manchukuo in the north around the Second World War. Or was it the First World War? I can't recall. It would have been the Second World War. Yeah. In any event, the Chinese Revolution that took place in 1911 had Africans involved in some way or another. The editor of the Beijing, I think it was the Beijing paper, the main paper that the communists used. No, the Kuomintang, the Sun Yat-sen, the first president of China, or the person who organized the revolution. One of his main confidants was an African man from Trinidad. He was the main author of and editor of the newspaper that they were using as their main propaganda tool. So Africans have always been involved some way in China. They even have black people who are part of a group called the Naki Chinese. who are indigenous to China. So we've always had blacks, Africans connected with China somehow. And of course, there's always been constant trade between us and China. In the 1600s, the Chinese Navy came to Africa, biggest armada of the Chinese that they sent abroad. We traded with them. There was even stranded groups of Chinese who did not return to China and set up towns and villages in East Africa and stayed there. So yeah, we've had relations with China spanning over thousands of years. I've just remembered something else. The Kushite Empire, which at one time controlled all of Africa, when they were fighting Romans under Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar attacked Africa, took over Egypt in 31 BC, and then a few years later in 27 BC, or 25 BC, depending on who you read, they attacked Kush. And the war lasted about 5 years, and the Romans were defeated and they sued for peace. But among the troops that fought on the African side was a division of Chinese soldiers. I've seen documentaries on YouTube and TV that claim that Romans and Chinese empires never connected, although there were two dominant empires in the world at the time. They were contemporaries of Kush. But Chinese people and Romans fought in a battlefield against each other, but the Chinese fought as fighters on the African side.
Well, let me hear you say, man.